about NABCo, the Nation Builders Call. This was, when it was established, was supposed to be the poster baby for this government when it comes to creating employment for young people. And they say they were told that there was going to be a path once you are in NABCo to permanent employment. But as we've seen, it hasn't turned out like that. Many of them say they are in limbo. They haven't been paid for months. They are now protesting on Thursday because they're simply disillusioned. That's what the promise that they gave them. So what is happening to NABCo? The thing about it is that NABCo is just the latest in a long series of other government youth employment schemes that simply didn't go according to plan. Often, they turn out to become a monumental waste of public resources. The evidence is there for all to see. We're going to track all the way from as far back as we can remember since all these agencies started being created and what it has achieved. And have a conversation about the NABCo issue, but what that means for the bigger picture of government getting into the business of employing people, right, in this part of the world, whether that is the right approach to take. We're going to go into that. That's the conversation we are having today. And as you see in the shot there, we have all these agencies that have, in one time or the other, been used by government as a means of creating jobs directly for the youth. Now, the key question now you always need to ask yourself as you look at these youth agencies and youth schemes is, should government fundamentally themselves directly be involved in employing people? I mean, just for the purpose of creating jobs for the youth. I mean, apart from the civil service, which government uses to employ a lot of people, government then goes out of its way to create all these agencies and schemes to give employment to the youth, right? But shouldn't government rather be creating an enabling environment for private businesses to thrive, so they rather provide employment for young people? That's a conversation that we're going to get into. So you see here, Youth Employment Agency, 2005. I remember when this was established, it was a big deal then, right? Created by the John Kufuor administration. Many young people were employed. What became of those young people who were employed? Was it sustainable? The key question now we see running through all this is sustainability. Often then they become job for the boys. They become an avenue for the government to give jobs to a lot more of the NPP card-bearing card-bearing members as the accusation have gone. And so invariably, they don't succeed. We have the Youth in Agriculture program, which was also one that was created. And then we have the National Entrepreneurship Innovation Program, previously the Youth Enterprises Support, which is YES, and a Nation Builders Call, NABCo. Now, these, by the way, where it's in a World Bank document, and World Bank had done a thorough review and assessment of all these agencies that government seem to create, the schemes that they create to create jobs, and they list a few of these, a bit more though than this. But if you look at the Youth Employment Agency, it's gone through several phases in metamorphosing into several other names from what they used to be. So we have the National Youth Employment Program in 2015. And then there was the almighty JIDA, right? So this didn't really work out. It was hit by its own crisis, and then it was then changed. The name was simply changed. And then Ghana Youth Employment and Entrepreneurial Agency, that's in 2012, right? We had JIDA. You remember JIDA? JIDA was one of the biggest, I guess, scandals that hit the administration back in the day. And then they changed it in the wake of all the controversies that JIDA faced, all the allegations of corruption that it became a vehicle for. The government felt the need to stop it and then reevaluate. And so they came back with a new vehicle, the Youth Employment Agency, in 2015 through the promulgation of the YEA Act. And the thinking then was that after the pause on this, that we've learned the lessons, and so we're going to do a proper work and pass a proper act to have the Youth Employment Agency. So that is how the Youth Employment Agency came about. It was hopefully a vehicle that was constructed based on lessons from JIDA, which everybody, if you follow news, remember how scandalous it was. And there were many vehicles that this created. We have the Youth in Agriculture, Youth in Security, Youth in Sanitation, Afforestation, Community Health Workers, Coastal and Sanitation Workers, Community Education and Teaching Assistants, Trade and vocations, vocation jobs, youth in paid internships. There's a whole host of them. It was under that the very famous story of their confirmed became a very popular part of our own, folktale in Ghana, when the previous government was criticized for having the youth in guinea fowl rearing, etc., which then didn't pan out for anything. That is how these schemes have been is over the years. All this, they employ people, and then accountability processes are very, very porous. How the money is spent, but you hear millions and millions of cedis pumped into these to create jobs. But over a period, you can find, so these people who we created jobs, so where are they? Are they still in the system? Are they really employed? That's another key question that we need to look at. Can we really call the jobs under these proper employment, so-called? We have a labor expert who will join us in that. Should we call them proper employment? Were the NABCo, trainees, were they employed? Were not? I mean, what really are we dealing with here? But I want to isolate the National Service Scheme for some comment, because arguably it's been one of the most successful schemes when it comes to empowering young people coming out of school with skills for the job market. I guess that's one of the ideas behind it. So you come out of school, fresh out of school, you have no skill, you go to the national service, you acquire some skill on the job, you finish, that then sort of sets you up for proper employment permanently, right? Very successful. All of us have gone through that, backed by law. If you don't go through this, you won't get an employment because you need your certificate to show that you've done national service. But recently, the current boss of the NSS said this, that the NSS to become an employable agency. And I think this is a big deal, hasn't been examined enough. I mean, the whole idea that he's pitching now, the current administration of NSS, is to turn it from what it used to be now as this, transit area for all of us who did this. 1 year, do your national service, work somewhere, get the skills, move on into the job market and get employed, mostly in the private sector, because you would have gained that experience. You earn something, an allowance. But the idea is being now mooted by the current boss of the NSS, Mr. Sebeyenchi, to turn the NSS into an employable agency. We're going to be looking at that. Will this work? Is that the way to go? Looking at all that has come before it, right? That, put it bluntly, failed. JIDA and then others that are coming, that it failed. Should we be turning NSS, one of the arguably most successful schemes, into one that employs people on a permanent basis? Key question to consider when we sit down and look at this. Now, again, the World Bank gives us a picture of how much we're spending, how many people we're employing, right? The Youth Employment Agency and Nation Builders Corps are the largest programs, right? Each engaging, according to the World Bank, close to 100,000 youth annually. So 100,000 youth annually is huge, huge. But you've heard from the NABCo trainees. One of them will join us shortly. They say, after this, then what, right? You give us a job for 1 year or whatever period it is. What happens to us after that, right? They said they were promised permanent jobs and they didn't get, right? And if you look at the National Entrepreneurship and Innovation Program, another one, launched in July 2017 by the government with seed funding of $100 million to meet the financing needs of young entrepreneurs. And huge monies are put into this, huge monies are put into this. The accountability mechanisms are always ones that we need to look at. And this program replaced the Youth Enterprise Support, which was YES. And they all have all these very interesting names. I mean, every government wants to do one for themselves. It's almost as if there's a competition between the government. Kufuor's government did it. Mills's government did it. John Mahama had his own. Akufo-Addo is on. He also has his own. Several of them, indeed. Let's go through a few of them that they put forth. So we have NABCo, 100,000 youth covered. Youth Employment Agency, 80,000 beneficiaries. National Afforestation Program, 44,000 youth. National Afforestation, we are going to employ youth to plant trees. I mean, questions need to be asked about these. Who is monitoring this? Who is enforcing it? Who is making sure that the monies that we're using in this is going to employ people? The word employment comes up again, right? We'll come to that. And we have the National Alternative Employment and Livelihood Program. Again, another one. If you look, this is the source, budget, the budget 2020. It's telling us all this that government is going to spend money on, millions and millions of dollars. is going to go into this particular one. But again, if you look at the World Bank data that we also look at, according to the World Bank, they out of a pool of 45,000 applicants. And remember that the Youth Agency has been doing this facilitation between themselves and private companies to give employment to people. So they have the job fair recently. Brilliant idea, if you ask me. Brilliant idea. Get the private players in the room and let them interface with those who don't have jobs. It was a brilliant idea, right? Instead of government creating an agency to employ and spend taxpayers' money to do that, let's facilitate the process. They sort of switched the idea a bit, which was a brilliant idea. And if you look at those who went there, some of them got jobs, some of them didn't, which is what the graph here shows. And if you also look at the World Bank data on the youth employment program run by government, this is overall. Out of a pool of 1.3 million applicants that had come through the process, those who did not get access at all is 81%. That's huge. So the tiny minority of 19% gain access. So it tells you that it's almost like a basket. A lot of them go through and just come the other way without really getting anything that they can hold on to as permanent employment. That's why we look at it. That's why we say some of them fail. And if you look at the numbers here, jobs that government is creating directly, we are talking about 2015, 357,000 jobs that government is creating. The biggest line item there in terms of the jobs created so far is what you have here in 2019. This government has the record in terms of the jobs that they created, almost 500,000 jobs. So this is good, but should government be in this business at all? Because you see that it drops from 2019. So what happened to all the thousands of people who were here? Because you come to 2020 and it's dropped to 80,000. It's the assumption that all the almost 500,000 are still in employment. You can't say that because the NABCo guys are complaining that they are jobless now, right? So there's a projection for government to create even more jobs now into 2030, right? And then agenda 1 million jobs, again in the budget, right? Government announced a 1 million job initiative. How is government going to do this? To create 1 million jobs, right? Responding to the unemployment issue. Is it through NABCo, which is struggling, obviously? And it was in the budget. It's a question. But there's money that has been allotted for that. It's a key thing. And if you look at agenda 1 million jobs, targeting SMEs, so empower the SMEs, give them the resources so they can also stand on their feet so they can also employ. That's a smart strategy, right? Others have said. Support new ventures and stimulate innovation and startups is what government had said. There are so many of them. There's also the U-Ban, right? And then there is the youth-led startup businesses. So there's so many things that the government wants to do to create employment. Why don't you centralize? It's another question that had come so that we can monitor, because it seems to be all over the place here. Then we have the other issues that have come up, the modules that the government plans to roll out about Empower Youth Entrepreneurship Drive, the Ghana Skills Enterprise Development Project, Student Entrepreneurship. So this government is doing a lot. Two things happen. One, to equip people with skills. Two, to give them resources so they can stand on their own. And three, to give them permanent employment of a sort, right? Which of these is the best approach to deal with? We'll come to my guest shortly. And according to the Finance Minister, we're going to put in 4.5 billion allocation under the Ghana Cares Program partnership with the private sector just to create these jobs. So this is not small money. This is a lot of money for this economy that's already struggling. So we're going to look at this whole big animal that we've seen over the years. My guests are seated, and we're going to be getting into that. Wherever you are, join me. We have Austin Game. Hello, Mr. Game. I'm grateful that you could join us here on PM Express. Really grateful to have you. We have Selom Brandt here with Imani, and Selom has been writing and researching and talking about this for a long, long time. And so I'm grateful that he's joining us. And we have the NABCo rep who is also joining. He's a beneficiary, by the way, beneficiary, and they are hitting the streets soon. The National Youth Agency rep is also joining me. They've been doing something different in this area. And we're going to look at their own experience. And we'll talk about the NABCo problem very shortly, how this then blows up to other areas after the break. For staying with us here on PM. It's a very interesting conversation. One that we need to have a bit more because of just how much money we're spending in these, youth employment schemes that government tend to create over the years. And my guests are already seated, and let's have this conversation now. Joining me right now on Zoom, you saw earlier, is Selom Brantier, and Selom Brantier is with Imani Africa, and has been writing about this actually. And it's been quite a while since I spoke to him, so I'm delighted that he can join us. He's a strategy director at the Imani Center for Policy and Education. Selom, I'm grateful that you could join me on PM Express.
Thank you.
Great. Also joining me is Austin Game. He's a labor analyst, an expert in this field. I wonder his thoughts on this. He himself has been there, seen all these in the past up until now. He has some lessons to share with us. In the studio with me is Ijaya Ongsia. He is the Director for Research Planning Youth Employment Agency, YEA, in the studio with me. They have a different approach slightly, and I want to tap into that. And so he joins me in the studio. Yeah, I'm grateful.
Thank you very much.
I mean, Selom, I want to start with you. I want to start with the NABCo question, because that is the trigger for this conversation. NABCo came in, fanfare, promises were made, people are going to be, given jobs, etc., etc. Years on, it's become another, challenged, and I'm being charitable, another challenged government intervention. The NABCo beneficiaries are going on a demonstration on Thursday. They say they haven't been paid for months. They say the promise to give them employment, the path to employment, hasn't happened. What happened with NABCo? Because you've been warning, you've been flagging this for a while. What happened with NABCO? Sorry, Selom. Yes, yes, I can hear you now. Oh my goodness, I don't seem to hear Selom at all. Is it Charlie with his with Selom's microphone? Okay.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes. Great.
Yes. All right. So I'm saying that to be honest, I think NABCo was a stopgap measure that has run its course. If you look at all the proposals that came and what it was supposed to do, it was not supposed to be a permanent fixture in the employment, landscape. It was just supposed to be a one-off program that was supposed to help transition graduates, I think both SHS and university graduates, into some form of employment where there was a possibility at the end that they would be absorbed into the pool of employment, either on the government sector or the private sector. I think initially, if you read some of the proposals that came with NABCo, it was part of skills building up some basic bit of experience, work experience, etc. And I think it was supposed to run for 3 years. And it was started somewhere 2017, 2018, when the first cohort came in. And for all intents and purposes, I believe that it has run its course. The issue here, which a lot of the NABCo beneficiaries themselves probably did not understand very clearly, was the fact or the promise or the thought in the back of their heads that it was automatic that these people were going to be absorbed into full-time employment under the self-same agencies that they were subsumed to, or they were sent to. And for me, it was very clear that that was not going to happen. First of all, because this would involve a huge process relating to recruitment and etc., and also budgeting. And it was very clear from the onset that government did not have the kind of funds to recruit all these people full-time or to absorb them into an already bloated civil and public service structure. That itself requires some kind of efficiency. If you look at it, in some areas they were productive, in other areas they were not productive enough. But then we are looking at an already bloated government employment scenario where in a lot of offices there are so many redundancies that already need to be stripped or streamlined. And now this burden of the NABCo people coming in and being taken full-time into this situation would only cause chaos at the end of the day, and a lot of unproductive people will still be under the government employ, for whose value addition is very questionable in terms of what they add onto the existing systems. We are looking at even situations where certain processes are being automated, and therefore the human intervention is not even required at all. And so these things that's happened, or these things that have happened, have culminated into a situation where the NABCo people or the NABCo beneficiaries, even after the situation that their dispensation has run out, feel entitled that they need to be able to, they should, not need to, they should be absorbed into the government stream or the government labor pool. But unfortunately, that shouldn't be the case. A lot of them rather should have been building their skill set and then preparing to enter into the private sector. Unfortunately, we have had multiple dispensations of government that have overemphasized the need, or they have created the impression that it's only government that should be employing or absorbing the huge numbers of graduates that come in. I think we are at a point where year on year now, we are looking at over 100,000 graduates, both from the secondary level and the tertiary level, who are coming into the job pool every year. Unfortunately, the systems that we have in the private sector cannot employ all of these people, and the government sector definitely cannot do that.
Yeah.
The communication here should have been initially that, or right from the get-go, that we were not going to be able to have all these people depend on the government for employment. And we should have begun to empower the private sector to do so in many other ways.
Yeah,
Unfortunately,
and I'll come to that point, because I think it's a very fundamental point. I mean, and let me put that to Austin Gammon. Mr. Gammon, so the fundamental question: should government be in a business, apart from the civil service, of course, of directly employing people, which is what we've seen over the years? And you've been there and seen it and done that. All government attempt to do this. Should government be doing that?
Thank you. Thank you. I think, in fairness to the whole nation and to your lovely listeners, honestly, it is not proper and should never be considered proper for government to be seen to be burdened with employment of people into the public service in the form in which we do it in Ghana. I think that is not fair and must be discarded henceforth. I mean, to be very blunt, civil service is civil service, and they have very properly laid down structures, including the optimum numbers they can take, beyond which it will create, problem for everybody. If we can stick to that, and government can have these things as a vehicle, as a stopgap vehicle, as said properly by Salam already, and as said by the president himself when he was launching these programs. I recall very well the first one in Kumasi. Clearly, it was not intended to be a permanent vehicle. It's expected to be a vehicle that will carry them to a certain portion of work life. Thereafter, you transition either into some private sector, some available government sector, or you take destiny of yourself into your own hands because you've had a taste of work life already. That was how the message was crafted and well understood. Not paying them is another business altogether we can deal with later. But generally speaking, it's not supposed to be, government is not supposed to be in the business of employing people permanently. The vehicle, the structure of the civil service is already properly laid down.
Yeah, I mean, stay with me. Let me bring in one beneficiary of NABCo, and I'll come to the Youth Employment Agency very shortly. I want to understand what exactly they were told and what they actually did. Nana Berima Asamoah, thank you for joining me. He's the president of the Coalition of Aggrieved NABCo Beneficiaries, and they plan to hit the streets on Thursday. Nana, thank you for your time.
Good evening, sir.
Nana,
good evening to
Nana, very quickly, yourself, you were a NABCo beneficiary, correct?
Yes, for now, I'm the patron for the coalition. Initially, I was a NABCo beneficiary.
Okay, so now you're a patron. So you are one of those who exited the program?
Exactly.
Okay, so what did you do? How long were you in the NABCo service for?
I was in the scheme for almost 2 years, please.
For almost a year. So what precisely did you do in those 2 years exactly for NABCo? What were you engaged to do?
I got engaged under the digitized module. I was placed with the town and country planning, the fiscal planning department.
Okay. And when you were placed there, what was the brief that you got? Was it unemployment, or was it to gain skills, or to acquire the necessary skills to then stand on your own? What was the communication?
Thank you very much, sir. The scheme was conceptualized on the fact that we assumed the graduates had no experience. So we roll out the scheme to empower them so that in case of job opportunities, then they can equally tender in their experience. And if you read the terms of reference that we signed, all these submissions that my fellow panelists were encapsulated in it. It specifies clearly that within the 6 months where the scheme will be ending, the scheme will link beneficiaries to available opportunities.
Okay.
Again, beneficiaries will be given an opportunity to tap into entrepreneurship opportunities where they will be resourced. And we also had an instances where the scheme was to resource beneficiaries who are interested in further studies. Indeed, all these stipulations in the terms of reference were realized at the verge of ending the scheme, where the government came out with a solid promise that indeed NABCo trainees who were enrolled on the scheme, they have worked tremendously, they have worked relentlessly in augmenting the various services that they were called to do. If you check Ghana Education Service, GES, trainees who got enrolled under the GES, they were deployed to the crannies where even sometimes the diploma teachers, when they are being posted, they seek for reposting. If you check the Ghana Revenue Authority, you realize that trainees were applauded for their massive contribution in augmenting our revenue base. So based on this, they roll out a career pathway, which before the election, the government promised NABCo trainees boldly that we have given you 3 options. It's either you select permanent employment or you choose an option for entrepreneurship where you'll be resourced to undertake your own private ventures. And also those who were given up an opportunity to select further studies where they had a maximum hope that at the end of the day, government will give me a push-up to continue my studies. So realize that all these submissions that my panelists have raised, I think it is a critical question to government, model implementation partners, and the initiators, because we have to ascertain our affordability capacity as a nation. If we have a chunk of 100,000 graduates enrolled on the scheme, and we think that, no, looking at the craving need in our system, at the end of the day, our payroll is going to be staggered. We cannot employ all of them. We cannot integrate all of them into the permanent mainstream work. There should have been the modalities in place at the onset. That is what CONAT, we always criticize, that there should have been a solid modalities put in place where trainees will be nurtured to gain that pragmatic skills, where they will be equipped.
But if you had done almost two years, you definitely should have gained those skills in those 2 years.
Exactly.
And you did that. I mean, and so if you did that, you already have the skill. Why are you not looking for a job yourself? Why are you waiting for government to link you?
We have a solid promise which must be fulfilled. That is on the first note. Secondly, as part of the scheme with the exit pathway, government has introduced 3 options. The first option is if you want government to integrate you into the public sector, you choose it. Second one is if you are interested in entrepreneurship, you subscribe to it.
And then permanent employment. You make that point. So you're saying that government has not kept its end of the exit bargain.
Exactly.
Okay, and so that's but then okay, so stay with me. Stay with me. Let me bring in let me come to the studio and bring in Ejaya Onsia, who is the director for research and planning at Youth Employment Agency. I mean, this is something that you do in terms of this facilitation, linking unemployed Ghanaians to the private job market.
Yeah, exactly.
Your model, are you doing the youth in agriculture, youth in, confirm rearing? Explain to me very briefly what your model is.
Okay, so essentially, just as my other panelists have indicated, the youth employment program is what labor economists will term as stopgap measures, and it's situated in a particular context. Let's go back to 2016. The unemployment rate in the country was hovering around 14.1%. And if you read critically the report, the Landscape for Jobs report that was done by the World Bank and the Ghana Living Standards survey, you juxtapose these two reports together, you realize that annually you have close to 300,000 young persons seeking entry into the labor market.
So that's for the job question, it's obvious.
It's obvious.
We have a huge problem.
So if you live in a country,
I guess the question is, how do you address it?
Exactly.
So where does the youth agency, what are you doing about, what is your approach to dealing with that problem?
So then you realize it's essentially a supply against demand issue.
Yeah.
So then you have to introduce some of these stopgap measures to be able to address the problem. And that's why you have a youth employment program as one of those public employment programs that is supposed to facilitate and develop some of these programs for people to come in. So there are
you employing directly?
So we have direct employment programs
such
like
as
the youth in, let's say, agriculture that we implement with the Ministry of Agriculture. We have the coastal sanitation, youth in sanitation, that we work with MMDAs to keep our communities
employ you
clean,
to help clean the environment.
To clean the environment. We have community policing, where in partnership with the Ghana Police Service, we have young persons helping the Ghana Police Service to achieve their community policing strategies and goals as well. So you see that on one leg.
Let me ask a question on that. That's the first leg. I'll come to the second leg because I think that's a leg I want to. But on the first leg, helping MMDCs with sanitation cleaners, Agri Ministry with youth and agriculture. Do we need an agency to do that? I ask that question because the Agri Ministry can employ themselves if they want to. The local assemblies can employ people to clean there. In fact, they do already. They don't need an agency, right? I mean, police, if the police want people to help them, they'll do that. Why do we need an agency funded with the taxpayers' money to do something that the agencies themselves, the police, the Agri Ministry, can already do? They don't need it. They have been doing this way before your agency came. Why is that a sustainable approach to fixing the problem?
So you'd realize that, let's say, the Ministry of Agriculture, for instance, is a policy arm of government. So essentially, they are supposed to be supervising, they are supposed to be playing the policy part, but making sure that government has the relevant plans. MMDAs also have their core competence and their set objectives to be able to. So you don't want to really saddle them with the whole challenge of also having to employ masses of young persons. And that's why you need a vehicle that has been specially dedicated. Once again, it's a stopgap measure. So you don't want to put so much burden on these vehicles, take away, distracts them from trying to achieve their objectives.
But it's interesting you say stopgap. But your first approach is giving permanent jobs.
They are not permanent jobs.
They are not permanent jobs.
So if you pay close attention
so they're not permanent
the
jobs.
YA Act 887, beneficiaries of the programs are supposed to be on the program for 2 years.
Okay, so the youth in sanitation guys,
they are supposed to be on the program for 2 years.
Helping the police when they go 2 years.
2 years, okay. 2 years. So that's the point. Now, if they are going to be on the program for 2 years, the fundamental question is what happens after 2 years? And that's where you have to go deeper into the question of an exit strategy. How do you exit them out of the program? That's why if you look at...
How have you exited them?
So far, what we've been trying to do with the exit strategy is, one, put in place an entrepreneurship wing where beneficiaries are taken through series of trainings. And in partnership with the National Entrepreneurship and Innovation Program, once they are done, they are given the needed skills and the startup capital to be able to start.
So you also give them capital?
We give them capital in partnership with NAIP. So it's not us reinventing the wheel. NAIP is already doing it. So we have created the pathway where we connect our beneficiaries to some of these programs.
But it's interesting you say that, because that sounds like NABCo.
No. So essentially,
NABCo
so
going for 2 years
you see,
and exit.
so that's why I want us to put this conversation in proper context.
Yeah.
Like I indicated, if you look at the unemployment rate when this government came in 2016, it was 14.1%. When you look at the number of new entrants into the labor market, annually we're doing close to 300,000. Out of that 300,000, you had a huge chunk of that 300,000 young persons who were graduates. So graduates' unemployment was the bigger issue that government had to confront with. And when you have these numbers, you must necessarily and intentionally introduce some of these stopgap measures to be able to deal with it. Now, NABCo was never designed, and just as everyone has indicated, never designed as a permanent solution. And I enjoy the NABCo model so much because it is one of the few youth-oriented programs that had an exit strategy in mind.
But it's not,
so if
exit
you look
strategy
at,
not working.
No, so I'm coming to a point. So when you look at the various streams, there was Revenue Ghana, there was a Enterprise Ghana that was supposed to lead young persons into the private sector. But then what you have happening is that it didn't go to as planned because you had issues like COVID-19 that has really struck quite a lot of companies. And I made an initial point that we are having really a supply problem against demand. Obviously, government can't recruit all the young persons seeking entry into the labor market. The private sector has to grow. Government has to come in and do what they have to do. But then the private sector has not seen, doesn't have the capacity to absorb the numbers that we have. And so that is where we all need to come around the table and start answering the questions or finding solutions to the questions that how does government, let's say government, the private sector, and let's say industry come together to ensure that we have that absorptive capacity to be able to find places for young persons coming in. And that's what has happened. When you look at the NABCo module, for instance, they had the NABCo Academy that had been designed so that for the entire 3 years that the beneficiaries were on the program, they will be taken through series of training programs.
So that is what was supposed to be.
Yes, and that was done.
But the evidence is in the products of NABCo. The products of NABCO are hitting the streets on Thursday.
And I'm that clearly tells you because of the remuneration problem and not necessarily.
No. That's no. That if you listen to him, that's one. But the major one is what he's saying: the exit. So a lot of them now are out of NABCo and stranded. Yeah. The skills is there; they've probably gained it, but there's nowhere to put that skills to use.
Now, Evans, the point is this, all right, and this is not holding brief for government, but the issue really is that when you look at the biggest challenge for labor entry into the country, and that was what NABCo was trying to solve, was that you had young persons who were looking for jobs, and companies were telling them that, oh, you need to have 3 years work experience, 4 years work experience. And so whilst they were home, NABCo was designed as a program to be able to engage their energies for that period.
So that gives them that
needed experience.
So that they
so you've been on a program for 3 years. When we look at your CV, your value has shot up as against if you were going to stay home the entire time.
Post NABCo, a person who should be realistically able to
enhance their employability.
Hand for the job. Stay with me. Let me bring in Mr. Gov't. Mr. Gov't, I've heard a lot that says a lot of the schemes start with this assumption that to go into the job market, private job market, you need some experience. And so let's give you that experience, let's give you the skills, and you go. That is where I throw in the National Service Scheme conundrum. The National Service Scheme is compulsory. You're supposed to go in for a year and acquire skills. And then government now says you're going to invest in additional vehicles to do extra. And yet people are coming out still without the skills. Even when with the skills, they don't have jobs. But let me ask you your reaction to this. I just showed you the chief executive of NABCo, the boss of the NSS, is now saying that they want to now turn the National Service Scheme into an employable agency. Give me your reaction to all that.
Well, Evans, I may not react, except that I will try and visit him in his office and let him know he should discard the idea. The reality is that we should not disturb the peace of this nation. The National Service Scheme has been structured in a manner that we have lived with it and we are at peace with it. My company has been employing people for national service. I know many other companies I work for that employ national service. Some of them, they help them, tool them, and they are either employed or they exit and they find their way. Look, skill set acquisition is very critical. And I can tell you, I've sat on a number of interviewing panels in this country. People don't simply have the skill to answer very simple things. So clearly, we should focus on helping the people to acquire skills.
But Mr. Governor, isn't that what all I've heard tonight? All the government interventions, NABCo, YEA, GIDA, all of them start with the premise that we are going to empower the youth with the skills. We had one that says we are going to empower them to rear guinea fowls, train them. All of them start with that premise. And yet, we are where we are. The majority of them fail.
Let me be very honest with you. I'm a trainer. I train people. We are opening our next class next Saturday. I can tell you the characters that come to my class, you can't believe it. And I want to tell you that everybody needs a certain, recreation, if you like. The kind of skill we are talking about is just simply not yet available. And those that are available, they are extremely very few. Look, let's concentrate. I like what my brother, young man in the studio is saying. He's a very hardworking person. He's a mate of my son from KNUST. So I just want to say that what he needs, what we need, all of us need, is to ensure that we stay focused on the models. Model is not intended to be permanent. That is why we must shift. If we can have a small shift as a nation and ensure that we get together the minds, the very creative minds that are available at this stage of our life, to be able to put together planned economy, not political economy. It will not generate much. We will have stopgap measures, and it is not something that is workable in its entirety. So I agree with him in the studio that we should focus on what we can do best to try and help get other people to assist. This is a nation that belongs to all of us. So if in any way possible, we can be all pulled together to try and drive a process that will develop the skills, the genuine skills of people. Hooray. But as it stands now, most of the people I've come across, they just not fit for purpose.
Okay.
That is it.
So that is a reality there. Let me put that quickly to the NABCo beneficiary. Nana, what do you say to that? That the real reality of the situation, that many of these NABCo trainees, possibly including yourself, you simply not fit for purpose. And that's the problem. It's not government's problem. What's your reaction to that?
Honestly, I do not agree with my fellow panelists on the fact that if the scheme was never made to accommodate opportunities where these young graduates will be given offers within our permanent mainstream, why should we roll out the career pathway to the extent that even before the election, we came out with a bold promise that we are going to integrate these young men?
Yeah, Nana, but let me ask you this. After 2 years, have you tried to apply for jobs
yourself? I want to put this on record. Please, as a nation, we are facing job crisis. We are not facing a situation where we have jobs in abundance, but our graduates, they lack the employable skills. I do not agree. I don't accept that. The problem we are facing as a nation is we are facing job crisis.
So your take is that the young men that you worked with, they have the skills, they just can't find the jobs.
Even some of the NABCo beneficiaries, they are victims of the defunct banks. Some of them, they've worked with other organizations before. The problem here is the scheme was introduced with a promise that at the end of the day, we are going to migrate these beneficiaries onto 3 solid options. All the submission my co-panelists, they've put forward engulfed what I'm talking about. We came out with 3 intentions.
Yeah, which you've articulated that. And so your point is that those 3 haven't been implemented. But let me bring in Shalom. Shalom, I have a big question for you, which is really fundamental to this conversation. Mr. Game says, focus on the modules, give them the skills. We're just hearing from the NABCo trainee that I have the skill, I just can't find a job. So something needs to give. Going back to the module, we just illustrated more than 10 modules: youth in agriculture, youth in security, youth in sanitation. My friend in the studio here from agency talks about more modules, right? We've had modules over so many decades. The only similarity is that all of them up until now have failed. They've all failed until now. Now we are trying something new, right? Question to you is that, why do these government employment schemes fail? Why? What's happening here?
A lot of these interventions have all had nothing but the chance to satisfy political agitation, period. There is no sense of sustainability of a lot of these programs. And listening to my friend in the studio, for example, it was quite clear that even in this particular case of NABCo, etc., the exit strategies are not very clear. We cannot just say that we are going to divide hundreds of thousands of people into 3 modules and manage. You see, so the issue here is this: expectation management has been poorly thought through. You are recruiting people and telling them that you are going to employ them, which will not be the case. You are recruiting people and telling them that you graduate them into entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is not for everybody. Yeah. In fact, successful entrepreneurs are very few, and they are very creative and very crazy people. I am one, so I know what I'm talking about. It takes a lot for you to be able to even do your work on your own and to go to the extent of employing other people, some who are older than you, some who are younger than you. And it's even a bigger challenge when you are young and you are starting something that does not even have a clear pathway in terms of how to integrate some of these people into mainstream business by offering certain kinds of smooth incentives. And then the third thing about it is that there are many areas or sectors of the economy that would actually benefit from an injection or training into some of these places. And like my senior uncle Austin Game has just said, it is the truth of the matter is that I am also an employer. A lot of the graduates that come out are not fit for purpose. Unfortunately, the NABCo rep disagrees because he's seeing it from a different perspective. But in terms of training, in terms of your ability to fit into a working environment, in terms of their ability to even understand what a job schedule is from beginning to end and be able to discharge those things, unfortunately, the NABCo modules, etc., have not done the right thing to teach a lot of these people how to do these things. Simple emails, for example, are hard to do. Simple reports are hard to write. And you realize that it comes from a poor fundamental level, even in the universities. So you churn out students who do not know how to do simple business correspondence, which when we were in secondary school, or those of us who did sixth form and the rest, we learned some of these things even through school in subjects like commerce, etc. But then the issue here, let's not talk about the educational system. Let's talk about the training process. The training process is not fit for the current working environment we have today. The training process does not equip people to be ready for the current modern workplace that we have. The training modules do not enlighten the young people on the right set of tools they need. So when you now say you are exiting them into entrepreneurship, you can talk very flowerfully about modules that you are putting them on, etc. But if you really give them that startup capital, trust me, the next thing they're going to buy is an iPhone, and then going to buy.
And that's where then you begin to see the waste, because then taxpayers' money are spent on this, and you can't account for it. Let me come to the studio. Let me come to the studio. So the big question is, I just tracked the history. 2005, Youth Employment Agency didn't work. Right? 2005
National Youth Employment
Program. Yes. Sorry. Yes, it didn't work.
No, it did work.
Well, I mean, it worked for a while.
Yeah, for a
while. But then the next government came.
Exactly.
And then it fizzled out.
So what you have happening is this whole appetite of governments.
Yeah. So I'm coming to that. I'm landing on a question, and then we have And then we have JIDA, which used to be the Ghana Youth Employment Entrepreneur Development
Agency.
Then we have the National Youth Employment Program.
Yeah.
And then now we have you.
Yes,
right?
So we are the Youth Employment Agency.
Yeah. Then there's NABCo. Before you.
Yeah.
Everything else before you has struggled. Some of them downright scandals, failed.
Yeah.
Millions, possibly billions spent on that.
Yeah.
How is your agency mindful of this history, avoiding that outcome that had befallen those before you? Very briefly, because for me that's fundamental.
All right, Evan. So quite a lot of lessons have been learned over the period. And one key thing that stands out is how we are able to set up a vehicle that brings in the private sector participation. So clearly, we all agree around the table that government can't do all this work by itself. The missing link has been, how do we get the private sector to come in? So government puts these young persons on programs, prepares them for industry, and then government should go the extra mile of incentivizing the private sector to be able to take all these talents that are coming in. And that's what we've been doing by introducing the YEA Job Center, where you have a platform that is actively looking for employment opportunities for young persons to engage in. Now, we are not only
the last
doing
job
that.
fair, how many people got employed?
So far, the job fair, when we went around the country, we've been able to do close to 8,000 people to various forms of employment, some in sales and marketing, health, education, and what have you. And it's the best way to go.
So why don't you do that alone instead of these other ones?
No, there has to be a mix, because you see, there are clear issues. We're developing economy, a developing
Those
country.
are the ones that fail.
No, those are not. There has to be a mix.
I mean,
it requires
models,
it requires a multi-sectoral approach. But you see, the thing is, it's not every.
All those are the ones that fail.
No, what we have to do as Evans, we have to bear in mind that it is not everyone that is on a certain level. There are people with certificates who have university qualifications who can get into some of these jobs. But then there are some people, there's a category of people that we call the needs, not in employment, education, and training. No skills at all. So that is where some of these programs come in to pick these persons up and then go there and take them through this.
So fundamentally,
there has to be
the pitfalls by doing what different?
One, ensure proper coordination, proper monitoring and evaluation, where there has to be some accountability. So if you're a government agency and you say you are spending 100 million on a certain program, there has to be a way for you to properly account for it. And that's where Parliament comes in and all the supervisory agencies come in as well. But there has to be long-term planning. You can't solve unemployment in a day. There has to be long-term planning. And I think that's what's been missing, because you've been seeing quite a lot of political...
I honestly wish you well, but you're fighting against a long history of failings in this sector. Gentlemen, enjoy the rest of your evening. The NABCo trainings, we see you on the streets on Thursday. When we come back, we'll talk about this again. Hopefully, then maybe we can start evaluating you. Enjoy the rest of your evening.